Hello, hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Black Girl Ambition with me, Niya Baxter. This is your go-to space for community empowerment and practical tips to help you level up in your career and in all aspects of your life. Here, we have real conversations about navigating corporate careers, entrepreneurship, wellness, and Black womanhood. I like to describe Black Girl Ambition as equal parts executive level coffee chat meets sister circle meets motivational masterclass. Black Girl Ambition is not just a podcast, it is a movement. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite streaming platform. And if you love the mission and the message, be sure to rate, review, subscribe. And if you have not already, please share with a friend. Ambitious Black girls. Today, we are speaking with MJ Jalloh. Mariama MJ Jalloh is a powerhouse at the intersection of finance, regulation, and technology. A proud Howard alumna and daughter of Sierra Leonean parents, she has spent 2 decades shaping financial systems and regulatory frameworks with global institutions like KPMG, Goldman Sachs, HSBC, and the International Bank of Qatar. Today, she is founder of FinTech with MJ, a consultancy with a bold vision of guiding Africa's FinTech revolution. And she also serves as program director at the Alliance for Innovative Regulation, where she helps regulators and financial institutions harness technology for inclusion and for impact. Beyond her corporate and policy leadership, MJ is a mother of 3. Can you believe it? They are all out of the house and in college. A trusted advisor to entrepreneurs navigating emerging markets, a sought-after global speaker whose insights have been featured in outlets such as Huffington Post and top FinTech publications. At her core, MJ is committed to building ecosystems where innovation fuels growth, opportunity, and lasting change. Today, we're going to dig into a couple different topics together. Those are courage and career transitions, innovation in emerging markets, and opportunities and challenges for Black founders in Africa and beyond. We're also going to be talking about some hard truths for founders, and MJ is going to provide practical advice for entrepreneurs navigating emerging markets. So excited to get into this conversation today. Thank you so much for being here, MJ.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's start with your career. You built a very impressive career at KPMG. You were there for 2 decades, and you built a career that many would envy. What made you decide to walk away from that level of success and comfort to found a startup?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, 20 years at KPMG doing management consulting work. It's funny, when I was at the firm, KPMG had a slogan called, KPMG, a great place to build your career. And I did 20 years. First company I worked with coming right out of Howard. And I was really fortunate enough to have great exposure during my time at KPMG. I had incredible mentors, and I had a lot of great opportunities where I worked with different lines of businesses. I worked in an emerging acquisition group, business transformation, and spent a lot of my time in the risk analytics team. Before the term product manager was even invented, I did product management type work for proprietary type software for our particular group. And that's how I was able to work with companies like HSBC and Goldman Sachs. In my 20 years, I had a lot of great mentors, and that's why I really stayed at the firm. But after 20 years, I saw that my career kind of plateaued. So when I left at the director level. I was 2 levels away from being a partner. But I really didn't see the vision. I didn't see the light at the end of the tunnel of me actually becoming a partner at the firms. I left. I wound up going to a smaller company called Basilio Cobb and Associates. I worked there as a director as well. It was another major milestone in my career. I worked very closely with the partner, Ralph Basilio, and he really believed in me and challenged me. And so that pushed me out of my comfort zone. He had me leading several major contracts where I, for the first time in my 20-year career, was responsible for the pipeline from business development, the pitch, going out and doing the conversations with the client, the relationship building. I grew a lot in that particular position. Right after the pandemic, I landed at a nonprofit called the Alliance for Innovative Regulation, AIR. And it was a major pivot for me after doing about 23, 25 years in corporate America. Being in a nonprofit space, I wanted to contribute in a way that it was mission driven work. And AIR aligned very well with where I wanted to go with my career. It's just amazing when you're in a different environment how you can thrive. And so that pivot had a tremendous change on me. And the organization exposed me to so many different aspects of business globally. And that's kind of the catalyst of me branching out on my own.
So tell me more about FinTech with MJ, because you have this startup and you're also working at AIR. Tell me more about the motivation behind FinTech with MJ.
With the startup, I had an opportunity to represent the organization on a global platform back in May of last year. They had me do several different conferences where I either moderated a panel, led workshops, or did like speakers forums. And one of the things that mainly resonated with me was I was in Nigeria, Ghana, and Rwanda for a 3 week sprint. And I was very involved in intimate conversations around the progress that was being made in the continent, as well as what future projects would look like that would transform the continent in ways that, in 2030, what we're living now and what you'll see then are be transformatively different. So I'm at the table where these conversations are being had, and one of the main characters in our story. The conversations were being led by Western and European conglomerate, and that didn't sit well with me. And that was another aha moment for me, because if you know the statistics of the continent as a whole, by 2030, we will have the largest working population from the age of 17 to I think 40. Billions of people are coming online, having access to technological capabilities through their phones. The continent is growing tremendously, leaps and bounds, in fact, in any other emerging market. And wanted to make sure that with this new fever in me of wanting to help, that all of the experience that I've had in the past that is being used in a way that propels us forward. And by us, I mean the continent, Africans as a whole, Blacks.
How disappointing. I mean, not surprising, but disappointing that you were at tables where you were having conversations about the economic future of the continent and we're not leading the conversations.
And when we think about how history has left us out of these growth periods, again, it resonated within me that there is so much that could be done in the continent with diasporians. Let me not even make it seem like it's a savior type of complex. The continent itself has the talent, and that was a major problem for me. The first time I went to Sierra Leone, it was the summer of my junior year at Howard, and I went with my dad. I was there for 4 weeks. I had to get acclimated to a whole different area, but I was able to meet aunts, uncles, cousins who I had heard of, but now I'm actually in their space, and we're going through Sierra Leone, and I'm really enjoying it. And what I'm saying is that we as a people can take the smallest amount of something and turning it into something amazing.
Always.
And that is Africans, that's Blacks globally. The level of ingenuity that we have is just amazing. So imagine if we actually have the proper resources. And so to answer your question, that was, it was another thing that I saw that these conversations are being had. We are at the tables, but in my opinion, I felt like we were being talked to. And with these conglomerates seeing that this is a market that is burgeoning, of course they're going to want a piece of it.
Right.
They see it. I mean, it's a new frontier, but where they're falling short, especially when you think about Silicon Valley, is that they are trying to take applications or solutions that work in the Western countries or Europe and try to plug and play in an African market, and they're falling short. There's so many different nuances that they have to consider that they're just not thinking about.
I'm so glad you said that because I want to transition to talking about investing in Africa's tech future. You said and believe that true innovation will come from emerging markets like
Mhm.
those in Nairobi and Accra and in Lagos and Kigali. Why do you believe Africa is where the biggest opportunities lie? And what are some examples of those really innovative solutions that you've seen come out of the continent so far?
Yes, there's 54 different markets, 1,000 different dialects. The statistics that I just shared with the population being the youngest workforce globally, the fact that digital public infrastructure is being invested in, they are coming online in a way that is bringing so many people into an economy. And different companies are going out there and doing what they can to break into that market. One of the things is that when they are solving for solutions, they're not solving for convenience. They're solving
Mm.
for real live issues that are on the ground. When you think about companies like M-Pesa, compare M-Pesa to PayPal. M-Pesa alone got a huge amount of the Kenyan population that were unbanked and underbanked into the financial system. That opened doors for creditworthiness, that opened doors for being able to be plugged into the economy. And so when you deal with founders that are looking to solve problems within the continent, they are being innovative and they're being innovative with the bare minimum. There's a thing called ecosystem tax. And because of lacking infrastructure, regulatory ambiguity, you'll find yourself as a founder having to have this additional cost and tax. And it's just not as easy as it would be if you were a founder in the States or in the UK, because you're dealing with so many different moving pieces that make it difficult to be a founder in the continent. However, they are making it work. And the solutions that they're coming up with are there to provide solutions to problems that a large population is dealing with. And M-Pesa is an amazing example of that.
And M-Pesa, for those who don't know, just explain a little bit about what that is.
Think about peer-to-peer lending. Think about like what Cash App is for us. Pesa is a peer-to-peer money moving app. And essentially, with their mobile phones, they're able to pay for goods. They can send money to a family member all within Kenya.
Mm.
And that allowed money to be able to move within the economy much, much quicker and faster.
There is a woman I follow on Instagram. She has a similar interest in fintech and in emerging markets. She often posts about how in Nigeria in particular, she has seen examples of these really innovative and creative founders who are solving for problems that Silicon Valley just does not have the vision to see or understand. Like how, and you had mentioned this, how do you bank without banks? Or how do you learn without schools? Like
Mhm.
these really foundational structural challenges that these innovative founders are solving for, but are coming up against these challenges of funding when it comes to Silicon Valley in particular. I have seen examples of them passing over these sorts of opportunities because they'll say they're not scalable, they're not realistic, our people don't have these problems. And then they'll go fund an app that reminds people to drink water
Mhm. Mhm.
10 times a
Mhm.
day, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. That's the part where they just aren't in tunes with they're, how do I say this? It's almost like the solutions coming out of the continent aren't shiny enough for Silicon
Mm.
Valley. They're not understanding that, again, we are building for resilience. Yes, we do need some convenience in what it is that we're doing, but Silicon Valley is not looking at the solutions that are needed in the continent at all. They can't wrap their heads around the fact, like you just gave an example, that in the village, some of the schools may not have the proper internet or bandwidth or electricity. And so they may not have the proper structures out there to actually provide a great educational system. And there's an edutech type of tool that has been
Mm.
built that can now be deployed in the villages so that these students can actually get a great education. They can't wrap their heads around that because public school systems in the United States are funded by the government. Every child is required to go to school. There are spaces that have so many different regulations around financial inclusion, and it's one of the things that FinTech is founded on. So when you find that Silicon Valley can't really wrap their heads around the fact that a fintech solution could be deployed in Ghana or Sierra Leone to close that gap, the first thing they ask is, well, how do I make money from someone who is not part of the banking system?
Obviously, there is a chance to be profitable.
Right.
So, I know you've spoken to this a little bit already, but to double down on it, what unique value does Africa bring to global tech that Silicon Valley overlooks?
Yeah, I mean, it's the resiliency. It is, again, being able to be on the ground and see the solutions that are needed. However, taking what little that they have and building off from that. That is a skill set that a lot of people don't recognize that can really propel you further. I've seen founders in the continent not take no for an answer. They figure it out
Mm.
some way, somehow. They're working with limited bandwidth, a broadband, they're working with limited capital, but they have the resilience and the passion, which are two things that I look for when I'm working with a founder. What is your story? And what is are you passionate about this? Because if you have those two things and that resilience, you will be able to propel your company in ways that could grow it into a unicorn. The population and where we're going to be in the next 5 years really will tell a lot. The fact that we're going to be putting at least 1 billion people on into a technical system via your phone, via access to broadband internet, that DPI is going to make a huge difference when the population comes on board. And so it's right for like any type of technology around education. It's right for any type of technology around agriculture. Of course, fintech is another big thing. Cross-border payments, remittances that need to be reviewed in a way where we're able to very quickly send money from Lagos to Accra. Another thing a lot of people don't know about, and I talked about this previously in one of my talks, is that when you are sending money between those two countries, you are either going to go through foreign exchange that exchange my naira from Nigeria into British pounds, and then from British pounds, it's converted to the Ghanaian cedi.
I did not know that. A European third party involved in sending money between two African countries.
Yes. As well as, and so they can either use the British pound or they can use the US dollar. Right now, there are so many different fintechs that are working to solve for this problem. There's a Pan-African payment system called PAPS that is actually in place right now, but there are, I believe, 17 or 20 different countries that are on that particular system, that rail system, that payment system. There are other smaller fintechs right now that are trying to solve for that.
What do you see, or do you see any recent emerging policy shifts that you think are going to be particularly beneficial or detrimental for growth and investment for African entrepreneurs?
So it's funny. I'm reading Kwame Nkrumah's autobiography right
Mm,
now. Really good. It was written back in like 1950s, but it's amazing. Even the
okay.
first chapter talks about industrialization. We're about 80 years since that book was written. And
Mm,
everything that he talked about how the countries in Africa are being held back with industrialization, and we are producers of raw materials, but we are not the last mile industrial. We don't have industrial market. And
yes.
so any laws or policy or regulations that encourage industrialization and not just exporting our raw goods will
Hmm.
do a tremendous amount of good for entrepreneurs as well as for the economy. Between Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, they send out at least 60% of the cacao plant or seed, which is the raw material for chocolate, for cocoa. But when you think about chocolate, you don't think about Ghana. You don't think
I
about
do
Cote
not.
d'Ivoire. You think
I
about
think about
Belgium.
Belgium.
There's not a cacao plant in Belgium, not one. They can't grow
It's
it.
branded as being from Belgium.
Exactly.
Wow. So the raw materials are coming from Ghana and then being branded as being from Belgium and
Exactly.
sold in global markets. And so
Yes,
everyone equates chocolate with
with
Belgium
Belgium.
and not Ghana.
Same thing could be said about leather. Same thing could be
Mm,
said about diamonds. I mean, Sierra Leone, we're known for our diamonds. If you listen to my dad talk about how my grandfather was a diamond dealer in the East and in the Kono district, he said that you can just like rub your foot on the soil and you can find like a raw diamond. But the money
wow.
isn't in the raw diamond, the raw stone itself. It's in the cutting and the polishing. And guess where that's done? 90% of those diamonds are transformed in India. India doesn't have any raw diamonds.
They don't have any raw diamonds.
No. So any policy that prioritizes industrialization and last mile transformation, and it's not sending our raw goods out, can transform our economy, and it'll be great for our entrepreneurs because there's so many different things that could be done in that supply chain. And some of the countries are moving in that direction. Like right now, Nigeria just passed a law that they will no longer be shipping out any shea nuts, which is the raw material for shea butter. They are one of the number one exporters of that. They now have a manufacturer in the country that is actually going to be able to transform tons of shea
Mm.
nuts. Of course, Burkina Faso, I think everybody may be aware that now the gold is being refined in Burkina Faso. It's no longer being sent to France. So
Mm.
they're minting their own gold in a way that they're wising up and making sure that we become an industrialized space.
So I am very happy to hear that those changes are being made from a policy perspective, that we are going to own our natural
Mhm.
resources and control how they are distributed. Have there been any responses to that from a trade or policy perspective? Africans trying to control their resources, I don't feel like that's going to play well necessarily with everyone in a global market. So tell me, and I have no idea what the answer is to this, but I can infer based on history and what I have seen the response to actions like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the IMF policies are
Mm.
put in place to continuously figure out a way to drain the financial potential of these countries. You will find that some of these countries have been forced to remunerate their funds. You'll see that there's austerity measures that places like Kenya have been forced to put in place, which cause double digit growth in inflation. The second, in my opinion, a African country has figured out how to minimize their reliance on aid and government handouts. There is some dust up that you'll
Mhm.
find where there's political strife. All of a sudden, the youth or there's some sort of uprising. We have to be very cognizant of the fact that there are outside forces that are intervening in
Mhm.
any kind of way. It is an invisible hand. They are
Mhm.
figuring out a way to infiltrate these governments. And
You know, there is a running dialogue perception trope about African countries, Black people, diasporic people, that says there's an inability for us to govern, to manage, to be self sufficient. Now, as a Black person, I know that that is fundamentally untrue. Like, fundamentally untrue. And that is saying it kindly. But
Mhm.
what happens that I see is that when there is that self sufficiency, the self sufficiency is the problem. The self sufficiency is the problem because the minute that that is there are efforts to undermine it. And that can be said for what's happening in Burkina Faso. That can be said for what has happened if you even look in US historical towns like Tulsa, as one example.
Yeah.
Whenever there is Black self sufficiency, there are efforts that rise up to undermine that, period. And it is so sad and disappointing that history continues to repeat itself, but it just does,
Yes.
because I think at the end of the day, it's rooted in anti-Blackness. And that's the root of it.
Absolutely. I definitely implore you to read any of Kwame and Nkrumah's books. One of the things that he does talk about that is that the European countries, they're not producers of anything. Well, the raw materials, they don't have the raw materials for mostly anything that they produce. And we have the raw materials. It's being transformed in these countries and then shipped back to the African countries, and we're paying a premium. We are not, back then, we were not in a place to be able to produce things. So we have the raw materials, it's being sent out, and now we're paying a premium that is keeping us under the colonial thumb. Some people will still venture to say that we're still somewhat under colonial rule because some of these governments that are stood up in the continent have Western and European backing. That stuff doesn't come for free. At the end of the day, you continue to keep the continent, well, back then, because I'm very optimistic and I'm seeing the growth, but the colonial powers knew what they were doing when they sliced up the continent in the way that they did. And now that the economies in these 54 markets are emerging and blossoming, they're going to want to continue to have a piece of it. And we need strategic partnerships. So I want to be very clear. I'm not on a soapbox saying that we need to do this all by ourselves. We need strategic partnerships, but we need to be the main characters in our stories. And we need to be leading the charge. That is, my major point when I think about all that I am trying to accomplish with my organization, my company.
Yes, yes, yes. I want to transition to some truths that you might have for founders and entrepreneurs. What do they need to understand about scaling in emerging markets? All of the unique kind of scenarios that you have spoken about that come with building in an emerging market. What hard truths do you want entrepreneurs to understand when they're working to scale in them?
Yeah, so if you're scaling in Africa, it means you need grit, you need patience, you need to understand the capital stack. Innovation alone isn't enough. Founders really need to take the time to understand what their value proposition is. The word of the day is resilience and ingenuity. Utilizing those two things will really push you far, but they really just need a level of patience because I mentioned earlier about the ecosystem tax. And that is a real thing. That is the key downfall of Okra Financial. They were pioneers in that space, and you have to make sure that you understand the landscape that you're getting in. We all want to be the first at the table, but if you're finding yourself in a space where you have to educate regulators, you have to educate the client, and you're presenting a new solution or a tool, you have to gain trust. Individuals are very risk averse. And so any inkling of us not trusting a solution, we will not use it, and you won't be able to gain customers that way. You need to be able to have a level of patience and understand the market that you're working in, understand the regulatory frameworks, the playing field, and you'll be able to be successful.
Do your research, understand the market, understand grit, have patience when building in an emerging market. For those who don't know, what is Okra Financial?
Yeah, so Okra Financial was a fintech company that I believe was founded back in 2022. And they wanted to take advantage of a new regulation in Nigeria that was similar to our open banking. And they ran into a couple of issues where the use case wasn't really clear to some of the partners that they were working with. Again, it was that bit about me saying that they needed to educate the regulators, they needed to educate potential strategic partners that could utilize open banking the way we utilize open banking. When you log into a company or like your banking system and you want to connect some information, your transactions. So for instance, I used to use Mint, and with Mint, it connects all of my credit cards, all of my bank accounts. Well, open banking allowed that to happen with Mint. I would go in and I would say, I bank with Chase, I bank with Bank of America. I can put in my login information on Mint's website, and Plaid's interface will go into those particular financial institutions and pull all of that information. Okra was in the process of building this type of platform, but they were early adopters, they were frontier founders. And I use this analogy, they were riding the train while building the track.
Mm.
And being in that type of space, you need to have a lot of capital because when the regulation actually hits, you would have already done all the pre work to make sure that you have your strategic partners lined up. They're fully educated. The use case is very clear to everyone. And that's kind of some of the pitfalls that Okra ran into. Also, not to mention the regulation around that open banking got delayed, so that drained their capital as well.
There was another one that I saw on your Instagram feed, and this was Lipa Later
Yeah.
in Kenya, that had a similar story of raising capital, a lot of success, and then it also failed. I think it's in the process of being repurchased at some point in an acquisition, but it had a similar story.
Yeah, so Lipa Later, they launched in 2018. Buy now, pay later type of model, and they're somewhat, they were considered a fintech as well. But when you're doing a buy now, pay later type model, it is very capital intensive. And what they ran into was they tried to grow too quickly. They acquired a company called Skyguard, and that was an e-commerce platform that was already having its own financial issues. And they kind of lost some credibility because they weren't paying their staff. They had a lot of issues, and then they wound up going under a conservatorship. They ran out of capital very quickly, tried to grow too quickly in a capital intense business model, and it just didn't end well for that particular company.
Mm. Completely different company, completely different continent, completely different industry. But it makes me think of the beauty brand that has started down operations in the US. Yes, Amy Cole. Do you have any perspectives or thoughts on the rise and sunset of Amy Cole?
I am so sad about her
So
venture.
sad.
And that brand had the potential of really transforming the makeup industry. And funnily enough, I'm actually in the process of doing a case study for Amicolates. So that goes when I'm working with founders that they can see. And to be very honest with you, she grew too quickly and didn't have the necessary operating capital to sustain going into Sephora at the velocity that her investors were trying to push her into. One of the things when I'm talking to founders is that all money is not good money. You have to really align well with your investors. I mean, they want you to scale very quickly, but in Amikole's situation, she raised about $2.7 million in a span of like 12 months. And then the opportunity with Sephora came in, and the investors were saying, keep going, scale, but there was no more capital coming in. And I think that was the beginning of her issue. She couldn't raise any more funds, and she just didn't have the capital to support her operations. Lesson there is make sure that you're dealing with investors who you jive with, who understand your model, who provide the necessary support. She didn't have a board, and she didn't have the strategic guidance that VCs can possibly give, an accelerator, incubator could possibly give. Her investors gave her money and just said they were hands off.
Why do you think that she couldn't raise more capital?
I'm not quite sure, to be very honest with you, because you would think that if you're in 200 plus stores like Sephora, that you can show that the income that you're able to generate revenue. I'm not quite sure. I don't know. I know that she was able to raise that 2.7 million very quickly because, and she says it herself, it was right during the George Floyd situation. And so a
Mm.
lot of investors were looking at their cap table and saying, okay, do I have a company that has founders who are people of color?
Right.
And I don't know if it was an experiment where, well, I can't say that because I think the Black Women Fund was one of her investors. I don't know who the other investor was, but she was unable to secure additional capital. And
So you mentioned raising capital, the necessity of raising capital a couple of times, and you said capital stack. Can you talk a little bit about what a capital stack is?
yeah, so founders really need to understand the different sources of funding that could possibly come and assist them with scaling. You can do debt. Debt is just, repayment of a loan. You can do bootstrapping. That's money coming from your own founders' pockets. Taking on investors. You can utilize angel investors. You can go to family and friends, VCs. But of course, that requires equity, and they're going to want a piece of the pie. When founders hear that initially, they don't really want to give up any type of control because we've heard of stories. I think if anybody is familiar with the story of Uber, he was pushed out of his own company. So, but that could be a risk when you actually do work with big investors. But it's necessary. If you definitely want to scale, it is something that you have to consider. And don't be afraid of going back to the Ami Cole story. You just have to make sure that you are working with investors that you align with and they see your vision and you are on the same page of what an exit strategy looks like if that is what your goal is.
Really good advice. For the founders you mentor, what's the first thing or the key that you give them about navigating this space successfully?
Yeah, for me, it's making sure that you have your brand story and it's told in a way that anyone listening to it can hear and understand your passion behind it. Founders who have passion, have grit, and don't take no for an answer, and also are willing to make mistakes are founders that I'm willing to bet on. I had a conversation with a young lady who is building a African food brand. She's looking at getting our type of staples like jollof rice, the sauces, inside of your typical grocer. And when she tells her story, I sat back and I was so amazed. She's a young lady. She's in like in her probably mid early 20s. I was so impressed by the way she told her story and the visuals behind her brand. It pulls on you in a way that makes you very empathetic to the story. And I want to know more. Let me see the product. And I was telling her that founders who can sell their story have a better way or will be a lot more successful in being able to raise capital. That along with having a great product.
Thank you so much for your time today, MJ. This has been a fantastic conversation. I want to ask you a couple more questions because you do a lot. You're a Howard alum, you're a mother of three. I know that we are the founder of a green, white, and blue ball that
Yes.
celebrates Sierra Leonean excellence and culture, and also a mentor and a founder. How do you balance ambition with community and family? How do you balance all of those things?
My three boys they're my why. They would never understand how they motivate me and push me in ways until they themselves become fathers. While I'm here on this earth, my goal is to leave a legacy, and I want to be able to be that person that contributed to the success of others. I've had a great career. I've been exposed to a lot of great things and learned a lot, and I just want to share what I have. I want to be known in this world for being able to give and not what I gain from it. And it's one of the values that I really instill within my boys. And whether it's like helping founders scale their vision or mentoring the next generation of founders and creators, I want to make sure that I'm creating opportunities for my community to thrive. And I want to make sure that when I'm gone, that my impact outlives me. That's my ambition.
Tell me, how can my listeners support you and what is next for you and FinTech with MJ?
I am in the process of writing a book called The Maximum Viable Product. It's a play on words, of course, but it's geared towards providing founders in emerging markets with a blueprint on how to create a startup from the bootstrapping all the way to scaling and possibly an exit strategy. That book should be out later this year, sometime in October. And I'm also working on an app called MVP Plus that is a crowdfunding app that will put out founders who are looking for capital to either scale or to start their initiative. And that'll be launching later this year, probably December. And then the immediate way that they can support is I've been working really hard on this sources of capital. One of the major things that you hear from founders all the time is this: they don't know where to start when it comes to making sure that they have the necessary funding. This took my team and I about a month to pull together these different resources, and this sources of capital can be downloaded from my website, FinTech with MJ. You'll find resources behind accelerators, those sources that are available for African founders, but it has a global lens as well. So if you're a small, medium entity in the States or a up and coming founder, that document, that guide can help you. Sources of capital.
Sounds like a great resource. So you heard it, Black Girl Ambition listeners. Those are all the different ways to support MJ. You jumped ahead to answering my last question, which I ask all of the guests who join the Black Girl Ambition platform. And that is, what is your greatest ambition in life?
It's the legacy, leaving that legacy.
Really?
And for me, that the success is going to be measured on how many doors I open for others to walk through.
Where can my audience find you?
So I am very heavy on LinkedIn. Looking up Mariama Jalloh. My website address is FinTech with MJ. I'm heavy on Instagram as well, just dropping little nuggets of information. And I'm on TikTok.
Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Overzealous when I'm thinking about the cash flow. I never had no handouts, just came natural. I've been testing so much, all these wrestlers nice.